Welcome back to Horrifying Stories. In 2013, a group of 7 adventurers went on a 2-week trek through the Arctic wilderness of Canada, wanting to explore its enchanting beauty and catching sight of the world's largest land carnivore, the polar bear. However, tables have turned when it was the polar bear who watched their every move all the way till nighttime. The following night, the polar bear returned and attacked one of the campers, 48-year-old Matt Dyer. Matt woke up to the polar bear eating his head whole. This is his horrifying story. Viewer discretion is advised. "60-year-old Rich Gross and 59-year-old Martha Chase were hiking trip guides who had often paired up together. Back in San Francisco, Rich worked for a housing nonprofit organization, but every year he would go on hiking trips around the world. Martha, on the other hand, was a medical diagnostic consultant from North Carolina and has been guiding hiking trips since high school. This trip to Canada's Arctic tundra would be their 14th trip as guide partners. With them were Martha's husband, 63-year-old quality improvement consultant Kikab Castañeda Mendez, 63-year-old corporate lawyer Larry Rodman from New York, 65-year-old exercise physiologist Marilyn Frankel from Oregon, 55-year-old clinical researcher and former physician Rick Eisenberg from Arizona, and lastly, 48-year-old legal aid lawyer Matt Dyer from Maine. Rich has always loved to check out places that ignites the curiosity in him, and the group has always liked to explore places no one has ever been to before. So when Rich suggested they venture into Thorncut Mountains National Park, they did not have any second thoughts. The park's terrain seemed magical, with majestic cliffs overlooking the Labrador Sea, plus a chance to see a polar bear in the Arctic wilderness. It was Sunday, July 21, 2013, when the Sierra Club group went on board a float plane of a company called Rapid Lake Lodge. The view was already breathtaking from their airplane seats. They landed on the Nokvak Fjord around the eastern shore of Thorncut Mountains. During that time, nobody else was there except the 7 of them. Immediately, they set up their camp about 150 yards from the shore. They brought 2 electric fences. One was set up around the campsite, and the second one around the area they designated as their kitchen and food storage. Each fence was about 3 feet in height, with 3 horizontal wires parallel to each other and attached to poles. Each wire's voltage was around 5 to 7 kilovolts, which may not be sufficient to hurt the bear, but probably enough to scare it away. They had flare guns and bear spray too, all of which had been recommended by an outfitter they were able to inquire from. Parks Canada's website strongly suggests that polar bear country park goers hire licensed bear guards who are certified with a special safety course and are permitted to carry guns. However, when the group contacted Parks Canada, told them of their upcoming trip and what they planned to bring, they were told it was fine. They did a lot of research as well and saw mixed opinions on whether or not a bear guard was necessary. What gave them even more confidence was that the electric fence wasn't in the list of the park's must-haves. They brought all the things mentioned in the list, and on top of that, their electric fence. This made them feel they brought more than what was required, thus, they generally felt safe and adequately prepared for this trip. Their first night at camp was calm and uneventful. They sat there and enjoyed the view of the Arctic wilderness. Terns and gulls zooming above the coast in front of them, wolves passing by every so often, as they happily share a hearty meal for dinner. As soon as darkness set in, around 10:30 in the evening, all of them were already inside their respective tents, ready to rest and recharge for the official start of their 2-week adventure. Kikab, Martha's husband, woke up very early in the morning at around 4 and decided to go out of his tent. To his surprise, he spotted 2 polar bears on the beach and shouted to alert everyone else. All the other hikers also got out of their tents. Right before their eyes, just a short distance from them, were a mother and her cub walking along the shore. They marveled at the sight of the 2 bears. This view was exactly what they came for, and it was only their first morning in the park. The sight was so serene, it almost brought Matt to tears. That morning after breakfast, the group gathered together, bringing with them their day packs, and started hiking east to go over the fjord. They made sure they brought their flare guns with them, one with Rich and the other with Marta. Along their beautiful trail of scrub willows, grassy hills, and breathtaking view over the ledges above their camp, they saw typical wildlife debris of all sorts, such as bear dung, caribou antlers, and a skull that probably belonged to a wolf or seal. Around 3:30 in the afternoon, as they were heading back to their camp, the hiker passed by a shallow stream which had cold and clear waters. Kikab quickly took off his trekking shoes and began to walk in the water, wallowing in nature's luxury after a long trek. But not long after, this relaxing moment was cut short when suddenly, Matt saw a polar bear approaching them. The polar bear was just around 150 yards away from them, and upon looking closely, it wasn't the same calm bear they had seen earlier along the shore. So Kikab immediately put his shoes back on and went back to the group. They did exactly what they learned about what to do during a polar bear encounter. They stood together and made themselves as big as possible. They made big movements and even bigger noise to scare off the polar bear. The bear remained unbothered and continued to approach them. Aware of the danger fast approaching as it closes in at around 50 yards, Rich took out his flare gun and suggested he needed to use the flare gun already. As soon as Marta agreed, he fired the gun and the flare came flashing toward the bear. Despite this, the bear continued to close in on them. This frightened them all the more. Relief overtook them when the shell of the flare gun landed in front of the bear, blasted off, and prompted the bear to retreat. They shouted and clapped victoriously at the sight of the bear running away. However, the smiles and laughter did not last long, as they saw the bear stop nearby and calmly sat on a ledge 300 yards away, overlooking their camp. Arriving back at the camp, it was already raining hard. Matt felt anxious and decided to stay outside looking at the bear, while the rest of the hikers took a nap inside their respective tents. After an hour, Matt felt sleepy as well and went inside his tent to nap. By 5 in the afternoon, the group had already started to prepare for dinner at their cooking area, but the bear maintained its position at the ledge. With the help of their cameras, they zoomed in on the bear as it kept turning over on its back and laying down on its belly. Marilyn felt like it was just a big dog, but the rest of them felt very uneasy with its presence. Come dinner time, they somehow forgot about the bear and went on enjoying their meal and their time together. Laughter filled the air as they bonded outside their tents. Whether it was from a previous trip or from their daily lives, each one had a story to tell. It almost seemed like a picture-perfect scene with the bear as part of the backdrop. Kikab's worries slowly faded away because of their bear encounters that day. The mother and the cub they saw early that morning did not seem interested in humans staring at them. The other bear ran away from the flare. In a sense, it seemed to Kikab that what they brought was indeed enough to fight off the bears. However, that wasn't the case with Matt. He could not just keep himself relaxed. He suggested they take turns in guarding the camp, just keeping watch of any movement the bear might make. But Rich just shrugged the idea off, thinking the electric fence was enough to safeguard them as they slept. Rick, on the other hand, was also able to sleep, although intermittently. He woke up from time to time to check on the bear if it was still on the ledge. A few times, he saw the bear still lingering, but when he woke up at 1 in the morning, the bear was nowhere to be seen. It was cold and raining when they woke up the following morning. It was officially day 2 of their trip, and they proceeded with their itinerary for the day despite the weather. After all, they only had 2 weeks to explore the park as much as they could. Again, they were astounded by the variety of wildlife encounters during that hike, from whales to reindeers to birds. The park just had so much to offer. Before they went to sleep that evening, Rich did a final check and walk around the fence to make sure it was still working. He kept his flare gun in his boot so it was easy to reach, then lied down listening to the waves crashing the shore. Its soothing sound made Rich drift off into sleep. It was 3:30 in the morning when screams awakened the hikers and brought the whole camp in total chaos. Marta peeked through her tent's window and saw a polar bear just a few feet away. Marta met eye to eye with a huge bear as it was down on all fours. The bear was mostly white except for its black eyes and nose. She screamed loudly, calling Rich, while the bear ripped the other tent and dragged it away. Startled, Rich pulled out his flare gun and ran toward the bear, but it was already around 75 feet towards the west. He noticed something hanging from the bear's mouth, and upon closer look, it was then that he realized it was Matt being dragged off by the bear. Matt was just sleeping in his tent when something woke him up. It was dark, but the moonlight allowed him to see the silhouette of the bear's two paws, each around 1 foot wide, ripping up his tent. He immediately shouted for help. With his head locked into the mouth of the bear, one side of the bear's mouth on his right jaw just below the ear, and the other side just above his left ear, he heard the sound of his jaw breaking and smelled the fishy stink of its saliva. His face was somehow tilted outwards, so he saw and heard his friends trying to run after them, shouting as loudly as they could in hopes of scaring the bear. The bear turned around at their shouts and faced them so quickly that Matt's body got slammed to the ground as it turned, but it kept its grip on Matt's head. The bear then slowly moved toward the water. Surprisingly, while all of this happened, Matt felt overwhelmingly calm instead of being in panic and great fear. Then, the next thing he knew, he saw a light flash before his eyes and heard the flare gun being fired. The startled bear suddenly let go of Matt, allowing him to fall hard on the shore. Matt could not even feel anything. At that moment, he became numb. As soon as the bear dropped Matt, Rich gave the flare gun over to Marilyn so she could cover him while he ran toward Matt. Rick followed him to where Matt was. 75 feet away from their camp, there was Matt lying on the ground covered in blood. At first, they thought he was already dead. Good thing Rick was a former physician, although he hasn't practiced his profession for around 15 years now. He kneeled beside Matt and saw that Matt was still breathing. Rick needed Matt to be back inside the camp so he could thoroughly check on him, so Kikab and Larry also stepped up to help. The four men transferred Matt back inside the camp, while the two women kept watch for any signs of the bear coming back. They put him down on a sleeping bag in the middle of the camp and put 2 sleeping bags above him to keep him warm. Rich and Kikab then carried the cook tent and transferred it to where Matt was. This would give Rick the space to do his own thing. However, all they had was a basic medical kit and Rick's know-how. Matt's face was swollen and bruised and his jaw got dislocated, but still, thankful that he is alive, managed to keep uttering the words thank you to his friends. Rick then proceeded to check Matt's injuries. His face and head were covered with wounds, but thankfully, blood was only slowly trickling down, not really flowing fast. This would buy them a little bit more time. A deep cut on his neck seemed like it had been sliced open. Rick could already see Matt's carotid artery, which was the main artery to the head and neck. Thank goodness it was still intact. This was his worst injury. Had the cut been slightly deeper, tearing the artery, Matt would have bled to death. The thought scared Rick. He knew Matt's condition was very critical and they needed immediate help. He got Matt's hand, held it and prayed they could make it to the hospital. While Rick was attending to Matt, Martha had been calling for help using the satellite phone they brought. It was 3:45 in the morning, just 15 minutes after the whole chaos first started. When a police dispatcher answered her call, Martha reported that a polar bear attacked them, and one of them was in a critical condition and needed to be transported in the soonest possible time. The group was also at great risk of the polar bear coming back for more human meat. However, the thick fog around the area made it impossible for rescuers to respond immediately, so they had to wait until the fog cleared up. With the electric fence in bits and pieces, everyone else in the group was alert and each of them owned up to a task. Marilyn moved around the camp with a flare gun as she looked sharply at the coastline for signs of danger. Kikab and Larry also patrolled around the campsite with the other flare gun, while Rich was stationed outside the cook tent in case Rick needed assistance. Anxious and desperate, Martha kept calling the police back every 15 minutes or so for any updates. By 4:20 in the morning, Rick told the group that Matt's condition was already stable, and as long as his artery doesn't rupture, Matt would be able to survive despite this painful ordeal. At sunrise, the group felt a slight sense of relief. At least they could now see the surroundings clearly for any signs of the bear coming back. It was only at around 8:30 in the morning when the fog lifted. After a while, they heard the sound of help coming. Resident medic at the base camp, Larry Brundridge, hopped off the helicopter to get Matt back to base camp. Larry and the other group's 4 men carried Matt to the helicopter. Rick also hopped on board to assist the medic during the transport. The rest of the group stayed behind and waited for a boat that was sent to get them next. In a couple of minutes, the rescue team carrying Matt landed at Torngat Mountain's base camp and research station. Matt was brought immediately inside the medic tent where Larry checked out the wounds and cleaned them. When Larry asked Matt how he was feeling, the 48-year-old hiker responded he felt like crap, something you don't normally hear from a critically wounded person. Larry then opened the big bandage Rick used to cover the wound on his neck earlier that morning, and suddenly the foul smell filled the tent. "It smelled like death," said Larry. The wound in his neck was the width of a pencil, went behind his jugular, reaching his esophagus. Every time Matt breathed in, blood surged into the wound. It was then that Larry decided they had to take him to George River Town, which was 45 minutes away from the base camp. There, a first response team was probably more adequately equipped to save Matt's life. From George River, Matt was then flown into Cojoac where doctors discovered that Matt's lungs was pierced. Immediately, Matt was sedated as the doctors intubated him. Things escalated quickly as that night, around 8 in the evening, Quebec's flying ICU landed to take Matt to Montreal, Canada. Less than 24 hours after the attack, on July 25, Matt had been finally admitted to Montreal General Hospital. Matt had broken his back, his jaw and left hand was almost in pieces, vocal cord damaged, suffered from a collapsed right lung, torn tendon in his right arm, and sustained multiple wounds. But he was alive. 2 days after, the rest of the group reached the hospital to check on Matt. More than anyone else, Rich and Marta, being the trip guides, felt almost relieved to know Matt was safe. To this day, Matt carries with him a daily reminder of the traumatizing attack. As if his scars and his now husky voice weren't enough, he had a tattoo inked on his arm, a polar bear surrounded by 6 stars representing his 6 dear friends who never left his side. Thank you so much for making it this far. We would appreciate it if you can like this video and click on the subscribe button. Do check out our other videos as well for more horrifying stories, and feel free to drop a comment down below for any story suggestions. Again, thank you, and we'll see you on the next one.